No one dies quickly in the dark city of Commorragh. There is no day or night here, only an eternal blood-lit twilight that stains every spire and shadow. The very air tastes of copper and ash. Every breath I take in this nightmare is a small victory and a cruel joke, a reminder that my suffering is meant to continue. Far above, stolen suns cast their poisonous glow, bathing us in a dim, ruddy light that never fades. In that hellish half-light, I see the silhouette of impossible towers rising and twisting like knives into a sky that never knows dawn. And always, the air trembles with the chorus of agony, distant screams, pleading wails, and the cruel, musical laughter of my captors. I hang suspended in a cage of black iron, one of countless such cages dangling like rotten fruit from the high vaults of a plaza they call the Square of Despair. The bars are cold and slick with old blood, my own and others who came before me. My arms ache from the weight of my body. I've been hanging here for Emperor knows how long. Time has lost meaning. Dried blood cracks on my skin with every shallow breath. Beneath me yawns an abyssal drop into smog and darkness. Above, other cages sway gently, each holding some poor soul in varying stages of suffering. I hear sobbing from one, prayers from another, and from a few only wet gurgles where throats have been too damaged to scream. Once I would have prayed too, but I know better now. No gods answer here in Commorragh. Only the dark muses of the Drukhari, their bloody-handed pantheon of torment. If the God Emperor hears us in this fetid corner between worlds, he shows no sign. Perhaps his light simply cannot reach into this hell, or perhaps he judges we deserve our fates. In truth, I've nearly forgotten what hope or faith feel like. Hope is a fragile, poisonous thing in the dark city. They use it as another blade to cut you from the inside. My body bears testament to that lesson. Through the tatters of my shirt, I see a map of scars crisscrossing my flesh. Burns, cuts, punctures, the ever-growing catalog of their inventive agonies. The freshest wound is a ragged slash down my left side, gifted by a bored guard with a barbed whip. Coagulated blood glues the torn fabric to my skin. Each time I shift, a spark of pain flares along my ribs, painting the edges of my vision red. Yet I welcome this pain. It is honest. It cuts through the numbness and reminds me I'm still alive when so many others are not. Below my cage, something stirs in the gloom. With what little movement the chains allow, I crane my neck. Far beneath, 3 lithe figures glide through the courtyard shadows, barely visible in the murk. A glint of pale masks and the sinuous motion of slender limbs, which patrol the gladiator elite of the Drukhari. Terror clenches my gut at the sight. Their presence means fresh suffering is coming. Perhaps they bring in new victims from a real space raid, or perhaps they come to select tonight's entertainment from among us. My heart drums faster. Fight or flight? Neither is truly possible. If they choose me, I'll be hauled to the arenas, to blood and spectacle and likely death. If they do not, I remain here in the cage, slowly starving until the homunculi fetch me for their laboratories below. There are no good outcomes in Commorragh, only different flavors of horror. A darkly comic thought trickles through my mind. A quick death in the arena might be kinder than another day under the flesh sculptor's knives. I let out a brittle, humorless chuckle that rasps in my dry throat. When the idea of being torn apart for a crowd seems merciful, you know all hope is lost. As if on cue, an agonized scream echoes from somewhere in the middle distance, a high, keening wail that warbles and then cuts off abruptly. My blood goes cold. That voice was human, I can tell. I've learned to distinguish the flavors of pain here, the timbre of a human throat versus an Eldar or some other Xenos. The sudden silence after that scream is worse than the sound. It leaves an awful, expectant hush. I know what comes next. I clench my teeth and press my forehead to the icy iron of the cage, bracing. From the shadows below, a shrill cacophony erupts, cheering, clapping, hoots of appreciation. The Drukhari spectators have been roused by whatever show just concluded. Perhaps some poor wretch was just executed in an inventive fashion, and the onlookers found it amusing. My empty stomach heaves. They applaud our suffering as art. The noise swells, then fades again into Commorragh. Ambient backdrop of misery. My racing heart slows a fraction. It wasn't my turn. Not yet. I exhale shakily, feeling that toxic mix of relief and guilt that has become as familiar as the ache in my bones. Relief that I still draw breath a while longer. Guilt that it comes at the cost of another soul's end. In the dark city, even our emotions are twisted weapons. They will make me pay for that brief moment of relief soon, I'm sure. I shift slightly in the cramped cage, trying to ease the chain's bite on my wrists. The motion sets the cage swaying, and the ancient chains creak ominously. Sometimes I fantasize they might snap and send me plummeting to the streets below, a fall that would surely end me. Part of me wants them to break. A fall would be a release, the last true escape. But the Drukhari know that too. They'd never allow so simple an exit. The chains, like everything here, are just strong enough to hold hope inches beyond reach. So I hang there, living carrion on display, and I remember. I let my mind drift because sometimes memory is the only escape I have. I force myself to recall the faces of my comrades, my family, the color of the sky on the world I once called home. Half afraid those memories will fade if I don't cling to them. But each recollection cuts as deep as any knife. Home, love, safety. In this place, those things feel like cruel mirages. Still, I cling to the shreds of who I was, because that identity is the last thing these monsters haven't ripped away. Not yet. Once I was a soldier, a proud guardsman of the Astra Militarum, Private Garion Holt of the 126th. Emperor, it feels like a lifetime ago. By my reckoning, it was a lifetime ago. How long I've been here, I can't truly say. Months, years. Time is strange in the webway's timeless twilight. But I remember the day that brought me here as if it's seared into my brain. The day the sky cracked open and hell descended on wings of midnight. It was dawn on my home world, a pale golden sun creeping over the horizon of the agri fields. I was with my unit, patrolling the outskirts of a modest settlement. We were all green recruits, still rubbing sleep from our eyes. The first warning was the distant whoop of the sirens. We barely had time to register confusion when the first explosions blossomed in town, followed by a cascade of others. Our Vox comms squawked with static and panicked chatter. Then came shadows in the sky, falling fast. At first, we thought it was some orbital debris or a meteor shower. We were so wrong. Sleek black craft pierced the low clouds with an eerie whine. Too fast for our defense batteries to target, they zigzagged through the atmosphere like hunting birds. Within heartbeats, they were upon us. Dark, angular skimmers skimmed over the fields, and lithe figures leapt from them before they'd even stopped moving. Impossibly graceful, impossibly quick. I remember one of them charging toward our position. Tall and thin, armored in baroque plates of midnight metal, a featureless mask covering its face with eyes that glowed like witch fires. We opened fire, reflex overriding shock. My last bolts crackled harmlessly off some shimmering field around it. The creature laughed, a sound like tearing silk, and then it was among us. But I caught a glimpse of a curved blade before my captain's head leapt off his shoulders in a spray of blood. Around me, My squad was being cut to ribbons by more of those shapes dancing through our lines. Someone screamed, "Xenos! Dark Eldar!" as if naming them would banish them. I doubt they even heard him before a barbed whip coiled around his throat and yanked him into the shadows. I tried to radio for support, but only static answered. There was a sweet, cloying scent in the air. Later, I learned it was neurotoxin from their weapons. It made my limbs heavy and my thoughts swim. Still, I managed to raise my rifle as one of them bore down on me. I fired point blank. The shot caught its center mass, enough to stagger it. In return, I earned a backhand strike from something, an electro whip, perhaps, that sent agony arcing through my body. I hit the ground hard, muscles convulsing, the taste of burnt copper on my tongue. Paralyzed and half-blind, I could only watch the massacre unfold. Some of the townsfolk had rushed out with farming tools, trying to help us. The Drukhari cut them down gleefully or netted them with filaments that sliced flesh to the bone. Discipline collapsed. A few of our troopers broke and ran, only to be skewered by pronged spears flung with unerring accuracy. I lay there on the trampled dirt, unable to even blink. My eyes watered as I stared upward. I'll never forget the sky that morning. Dawn's gentle colors bruised by pillars of greasy smoke, sleek alien skimmers drifting overhead, silhouetted against the sun. It was so surreal, beautiful in a sick way. Then a boot settled on my chest and a slender blade hovered at my throat. Through watering eyes, I saw my would-be executioner, an Eldar face, alabaster perfect and cold, framed by flowing dark hair. And those eyes, depthless black pits studying me like a specimen. This one wore no mask. He looked almost young, but I knew he was ancient compared to me. His thin lips curved in a predatory smile when he realized I was paralyzed, helpless at his feet. He said something in his musical alien tongue. Of course, I didn't understand. I must have made some faint groan because his smile broadened. He knelt and almost gently patted my cheek, a mockery of a comforting gesture. Then darkness, a hood or sack shoved over my head, a blow to my skull. I remember no more of the raid. I awoke to pain and chaos. When the hood was eventually yanked off, I found myself packed in the hold of a strange craft with dozens of others, all bound, injured, terrified. The stench of sweat, blood, and urine filled the cramped space. We were inside one of their ships, I realized, and it was moving through the webway, though I didn't know it then. The floor vibrated under us with a sickening, nauseating rhythm. Red emergency lumens bathed the scene in hellish light. I saw men and women from my regiment and the settlement thrown together in heaps. Some sobbed or prayed under their breath. Others, like me, were still partly paralyzed by toxins, limbs twitching uselessly. Near me, old Father Colvin, our regimental chaplain assigned to the locals, was whispering the litany of protection over and over, clutching his Aquila necklace so hard it drew blood from his palm. Suddenly, the vessel lurched, probably exiting the webway into Commorragh's docking port, though I couldn't know that. The harsh lighting flickered. The Drukhari guards began barking orders and prodding us to our feet with shock poles. We were corralled toward a gaping hatch. I stumbled out, blinking against a sudden assault of stimuli. High Gothic arches overhead, the reek of alien spices and promethium in the air, and a vast open space thronged with activity. We had arrived in Commorragh, the port of lost souls, as I later learned it was called, the primary slave dock of the Dark City. Even in my disoriented state, the sheer scale of the place stunned me. Towering structures soared into a cavernous vault, illuminated by a dim, red-black sky. Thousands of pinprick lights glinted from distant spires. Sleek gravcraft zipped between them like schools of predatory fish. And everywhere, crowds of Drukhari and other vile Xenos moved with sinister purpose. I had scant time to gawp. We were roughly shoved into lines on a platform alongside other groups of captives from who knows how many raids. Immediately, a squad of hunched figures swarmed us, overseers taking stock of the new merchandise. They barked at each other in their sharp language, consulting flickering data slates as they walked the lines, tapping some prisoners and dismissing others. It dawned on me, we were being sorted like livestock. Those too wounded or old were cast aside, literally. I saw one guard drag a limp, moaning man to the platform's edge and hurl him over without a second glance. A distant splash and the faint thrash of water followed. Emperor, they tossed him into the harbor's acidic waters alive. I later learned creatures called corpse collectors would fish out such bodies to render into nutrient gruel for slaves. Nothing wasted in Commorragh. My blood ran cold. The fittest among us, mostly soldiers and a few sturdy farmers, were marked. A spur of pain, an overseer pressed a red-hot sigil to my forehead. I smelled my own flesh burn. When he removed it, Colvin, standing beside me, made the sign of the Aquila over my head with trembling fingers. A glowing rune had been seared onto me. I couldn't read their curvilinear script, but I imagine it said something like arena fodder, or perhaps simply a catalog number. Other prisoners were earmarked differently or separated out entirely. I saw the young mother from the shuttle, the one whose little girl had been taken, led with a group of weeping civilians in another direction, likely destined for private ownership or worse. Father Colvin, still alive and praying, was shoved that way too. I never saw either of them again. In a way, I pray their end was swift. There are far worse things in Commorragh than a quick death. As for me, I was herded with about 20 other healthy human captives, fresh meat for the slave pens. Metal collars were clamped around our necks and our ankles shackled in a line. They marched us off the dock and into the city proper. My senses were assaulted from all sides as we left the relatively open port into the claustrophobic streets of Commorragh. Above us arced bridges like spider webs, connecting impossibly tall towers of black metal and wraithbone. The architecture defied reason. Buildings twisted and leaned at angles that made my head ache to follow. Grotesque gargoyles and demonic statuary jutted from every ledge, and I could swear some of those statues writhed subtly when unobserved, as if they were alive under a shell of stone. All around, throngs of Drukhari civilians went about their vile business, barely giving us more than a hungry glance. I saw things on that forced march that I will take to my grave. A pile of bones stacked into an archway, each fresh skull impaled atop still mouthing silent screams. An open market stall where slender elves bartered over jars containing living, sobbing human heads kept alive by some cruelty, the peddler holding up each jar to demonstrate the agony within as a selling point. A fountain that ran not with water but with thick, dark blood. Around it, cackling children. Drukhari children, Emperor preserve us, as wicked as the adults, played and splashed. Their laughter rang out like crystal chimes, as if this were all a casual day at the bazaar. Suddenly, a pair of board-riding hellions zipped overhead, cackling as they swung their barbed sky blades. One dropped low with a shriek of delight. In a blur of motion, an unfortunate slave from a chained column ahead of us was lifted off his feet, his head cleaved clean from his shoulders by the Hellion's passing strike. The onlookers roared with laughter and applause at this impromptu display. We marched onward beneath the spray of that poor soul's blood, too frightened to even react. And everywhere we trudged, Drukhari citizens paused to watch, their eyes hungry. Some shouted jeers or pelted us with scraps. One elaborate-looking noble even applauded slowly, as if congratulating us on our misfortune. I kept my gaze low, focusing on one step at a time. It took everything to not collapse from shock and exhaustion. Any who lagged were jolted by an electric prod or whipped until they rejoined pace. They led us down, ever down. We left behind the wider avenues and descended through crooked side streets and narrow stairs, lit by flickering green witchlights. The deeper we went, the thicker the air became, cloying with the stench of blood, chemicals, and rot. Distant machinery clanged and hummed beneath us, and occasionally an insane cackle or scream would echo through the vents in the walls. My heart sank further with each step. I realized we were being taken into the underbelly of the dark city. Lo Commorragh, the den of the Homunculi, the flesh crafters. If the streets above were hell, the pits below were hell's sub-basement. At last we emerged into a sprawling underground warren of cells and chambers. Wailing and pleas emanated from behind iron doors. Torture devices and dark stains littered the halls. This was a processing center, a slave intake, or storage for the coven. Our captors removed our shackles and shoved us into a holding pen, a single large cell with slick black metal walls. The door slammed shut with a thunderous clang that echoed finality. That was the moment it truly sunk in. This wasn't a nightmare I'd wake from. I was in Commorragh, in the bowels of the dark city itself, and I might never see the Emperor's light again. The cell was dimly lit by a sickly biolume strip. About 20 of us were packed inside. A few collapsed to the floor, sobbing or deathly silent. I found a space by a wall and sank down, my legs finally giving out as adrenaline ebbed. My wounded thigh throbbed, and I dared a look. A puncture mark with sickly green edges. The Drukhari toxin was still in me, though diluted. It likely would have killed me if they wanted, but clearly they had not wanted. They went to great pains not to kill us during capture, because they had plans for us alive. This bleak realization broke something in me. I pressed my forehead to my knees and, Emperor, forgive me, I wept. Silent, shaking tears that I smeared away with bloody hands. A guardsman isn't supposed to cry, but I wasn't a guardsman anymore. I was just another nameless victim in this charnel city. In the oppressive quiet of that cell, broken only by muffled sobs and prayers, I heard a raspy voice beside me.
First time in the dark city, soldier?
It whispered in Imperial Gothic. I lifted my head. An older man sat a few feet away, barely visible in the gloom. His face was gaunt, a skull draped in skin, but his eyes held a glint that cut through the darkness. I sniffed and managed a nod. He gave a humorless chuckle that turned into a cough.
You'll get used to it,
he lied kindly.
Or maybe you won't. They like to keep you off balance. Fear is half the torture.
He extended a trembling hand.
Name's Tal. Void ship crew out of Baylor Secundus. At least I was.
I took his hand weakly. Holt, I introduced myself, voice hoarse. 126th Gudrunite Rifles. At least I was. Our grips, feeble though they were, conveyed a mutual comfort. In this pit of despair, even a brief camaraderie was a lifeline. We spoke in low whispers while others either cried or sat catatonic. Tal had been captured months, or was it years, ago when his freighter was ambushed. He'd survived thus far by, in his words, learning when to bend and when to hide. He gave me subtle advice. How to position my body to minimize pain in shackles, small Eldar phrases to avoid angering guards, tricks to numb oneself during torture. Emperor, to hear those words given so calmly, nearly made me retch. This kindly old man instructing me on how to endure the unendurable.
They'll come for one of us soon,
he wheezed, gaze distant as if seeing some memory.
Always do with fresh stock. Pick out a screamer to spice up their supper.
I shivered. He noticed and patted my shoulder gently.
Steady, lad. Keep your wits. Your mind is your own until you give it up. Don't let them take that last piece.
Just then, a series of sharp screams rang out from the corridor beyond the cell door, followed by guttural laughter. We all flinched. One of the younger prisoners began hyperventilating. Tall's jaw tightened.
Starting early tonight,
he murmured. Moments later, heavy footfalls approached. Our cell door slid open with a grating hiss. Framed in the doorway was a nightmare, a towering figure, tall and skeletally thin, draped in flayed skins like a robe. Its flesh was deathly pale, almost translucent, stretched impossibly taut over an elongated frame. Black eyes, soulless and lidless, swept over us, and thin lips pulled into a grotesque facsimile of a smile. A homunculus, the lords of pain I'd heard whispers of. My blood ran cold. Behind it lurched two hunched attendants. Racks, I would learn to call them. Twisted, once human, or once Eldar, things modified into mindless torture servants. They moved with jerky motions, their bodies riddled with tubes feeding glowing fluids into their veins. Each had extra arms grafted onto their torso, holding an array of wicked implements, saws, syringes, claws. The homunculus spoke, a dry, papery sound, and one of the racks stepped forward, raising a strange orb-like device. A crackling artificial voice translated the homunculus's words into crude low Gothic.
Welcome, newcomers. How fortunate you are to be chosen for our attentions.
The way it said fortunate made my skin crawl.
Tonight,
the voice continued tonelessly,
we shall savor the limits of your flesh. Rejoice, your suffering shall bring us enlightenment.
As if to punctuate the introduction, the homunculus's long, many-jointed fingers twitched eagerly. I caught glimpses of cruel tools hanging inside its cloak, clinking softly as it shifted. We huddled back instinctively. One man near the front completely lost whatever composure he had and began sobbing for mercy, clutching at the hem of the homunculus's robe. The creature regarded him with what might have been amusement, or maybe just idle curiosity. In a flash, it whipped an arm forward, long needle-like claws extended from its fingertips and sank into the man's throat. He gurgled, eyes bulging. The homunculus lifted him off the ground one-handed, like one might hold up a squealing kitten. The man's feet kicked feebly for a moment, then stilled. With a casual flick, the homunculus tossed the corpse aside. It smacked wetly against the wall. A few of us cried out in horror. I had pressed myself against the back of the cell, teeth chattering. Tall beside me was muttering,
"Don't look, don't look."
But I couldn't tear my eyes away. The homunculus's gaze swept the cell again and landed on a young woman named Marielle, one of the Agri settlement folk who'd been caught. She was wounded but still sturdy. Maybe they fancied her spirit. It pointed a bony finger at her. A rack immediately seized Marielle by the hair. She screamed and struggled, but another rack grabbed her legs. Together, they dragged her towards the door.
No! No, please!
She shrieked, nails scrabbling on the metal floor, leaving red trails where her fingertips tore. We could only watch in impotent terror. One of the other men tried to rush forward to help her, either out of bravery or madness. But the homunculus twitched its other hand and a barbed whip unfurled from its sleeve, slicing across his face. He dropped, screaming and clutching the ruin of his eyes. Marielle's cries echoed down the corridor as they took her away. The cell door slided shut again, locking us in suffocating dimness once more. "Throne of Terror," someone whispered between sobs. My stomach churned. I think I retched, bringing up nothing but bile. Tall put a trembling hand on my knee.
They always take a few at the start to break us in.
Break us? We were already broken. A few minutes passed that felt like hours. Then it came, Marielle's screams muffled by distance, but unmistakable and unforgettable. They rose in pitch, raw, animalistic, full of a pain that seared the soul. Every person in that cell felt those screams like needles under the skin. A burly farmer clamped his hands over his ears, rocking and praying to wake up from this nightmare. The rest of us just sat, trembling, tears streaming silently. The sounds that came with her screams were ghastly, whirring blades, the crackle of energy discharges, squelches and snaps that turned my bowels to water. Occasionally, the homunculus's voice drifted down the hall, low, almost soothing, and Marielle's screaming would intensify, as if in response to some new horror described to her. They were telling her what they'd do. I realized they enjoyed letting us hear it, heightening our dread. I caught myself whispering, "Emperor, please let her die. Let it end." Not out of malice, but mercy. Mercy for her and for us listening. But death did not come quickly in the Dark City. No, they kept her alive for what felt like an eternity. Finally, after a particularly long bout of silence, our cell door hissed open. 2 racks reappeared, carrying something between them. They tossed it inside and left without a word, door clanging shut once more. It was Marielle, or rather what remained of her. A collective gasp, a few turned away to retch. I crawled closer despite the bile in my throat, a horrible compulsion to see, to know what they'd done. Marielle was unconscious. Please, Emperor, let her have been unconscious. Her arms. Emperor, have mercy. Her arms were gone below the elbow, crudely cauterized. Deep, precise cuts crisscrossed her torso, flaying the skin in a grotesque pattern. Worst was her face. Her eyes had been removed. 2 empty, bloody sockets stared at nothing. Her cheeks were sliced in a way that exposed teeth through the skin. Yet somehow she still breathed, chest hitching shallowly. A groan escaped her lips, startling me. She was alive. Fates. I gently reached out, my hand hovering above her mangled shoulder, not sure where I could touch that wouldn't hurt. "Marielle," I whispered. Her one remaining ear twitched at the sound. Her head turned slightly toward my voice. "It's okay," I lied softly, tears dripping from my chin. "You're back. You're safe now." The absurdity of that statement choked me. She made a wet, gargling noise. I realized she was trying to speak. I leaned closer, ears almost touching her lips. Faint, broken words bubbled forth.
Why? I see them. They inside me. Why?
My composure shattered. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed. It was all I could think to say, over and over. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Her blood was all over my hands now, sticky and warm. Marielle gave one last shuddering breath, as if sighing relief at hearing a friendly voice, and then she was still. I prayed her spirit flew to the Emperor, far from this hell. We sat in stunned silence around her body. There were no words, only horror. Tal quietly began to recite the Emperor's benediction for the departed. Some of us joined in a fractured chorus, hoping to grant her soul a sliver of peace, even as our own hearts filled with hatred and despair. I will say this for the Drukhari. They hadn't just tortured and killed one of us. They had reached into every one of our hearts and twisted. From that moment, I vowed silently that I would fight them in any way I could, even if only in my own mind. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break completely. But such vows are easier made than kept, especially in Commorragh. Thus began our life of captivity in the Dark City. In the days that followed, one man even attempted the unthinkable: escape. Late one cycle, when a cell door was carelessly left unlatched after a guard's visit, a miner named Farron slipped out into the corridor. Perhaps he hoped the commotion of distant fighting in the city would mask his flight. We waited, breathless, but within a minute a strangled cry echoed from the darkness and abruptly fell silent. In the flicker of a dying lumen, I thought I saw a tall, spined shadow slither along the ceiling, twin embers for eyes, and I knew it was no Drukhari guard. Come morning, the handlers tossed something back into our cell with disgust. Farron's severed arm, identifiable by the tattoo on his wrist. The stump was cauterized with an eerie rime of frost. Tall whispered that the ghastly mandrakes had claimed another victim in the shadows. The warning was heeded. Even if our cage stood open, we understood there were far worse fates waiting just beyond the threshold. No walls or chains were needed to keep us in. Fear kept us penned more securely than any lock. In the weeks that ensued, if time can be measured in that sunless place, we learned the routine of suffering. There was a dark rhythm to it, random, yet unrelenting. Sometimes they would come for us twice in what felt like a day, sometimes not for a span of rest cycles, but the dread was constant. Dread of that cell door opening, dread of footsteps in the hall. We scarcely slept. Exhaustion warred with adrenaline constantly. One by one, the original group of 20 dwindled. Some were taken by Haimon Cooley and never returned. Others came back in pieces, literally, or in states worse than death. I recall a man named Brenner, a gangly factory worker. The Homunculi took him one cycle. When they dragged him back, he was changed. They had somehow grafted an extra pair of arms onto him, arms that weren't even his, a smaller set like a child's, jutting from his midsection. His eyes were gone, replaced by metal orbs that wept tears of blood, and he screamed. Emperor's mercy. He wouldn't stop screaming. All night until one of the guards got annoyed and slit his throat in the cell. Perhaps that was mercy. Food was provided inconsistently, a tasteless gruel or water laced with drugs to keep us docile or to test some concoction's effects we never knew. Thirst eventually made us drink. Hunger made us eat. Sometimes the food stimulated, giving flashes of false energy or delirium. Sometimes it paralyzed or made us nauseous. Feeding was just another experiment to them. Through it all, Tal's presence anchored me somewhat. He told crude jokes at times, trying to make me chuckle at our absurd situation.
Our accommodations could use a bit more light.
He'd whisper, gesturing at the gloom, or,
At least we don't have to worry about rent.
gallows humor. It wasn't really funny, but I smiled weakly when I could, appreciating the intent. In quieter moments, he spoke of his family back home, a wife and 2 daughters who'd be waiting. I think he spoke of them often so he wouldn't forget their faces. I did the same, reciting my siblings' names under my breath, clinging to memory. It was a fragile shield, but it helped keep the darkness from consuming our minds entirely. Sometimes I wondered if death would have been better than this slow dissolution of self. But that ember of anger inside me, the one born when Marielle fell, wouldn't let me embrace death. It flared each time I thought of giving up, whispering, "Make them pay for it by living." Petty, perhaps, but it kept me going. Our captors noticed that ember, I think. Or perhaps it was random chance. But when next the witch cult representatives came down to claim slaves for their arenas, I was among those they chose. It happened after what I guess was some months of torture in the Coven dungeons. A cadre of tall, athletic Drukhari strode into the cell block, accompanied by guards. These were different from the Homunculi's cadaverous lot. These were lithe, panther-like, with minimal armor that revealed honed musculature, hair in wild top knots, faces painted with garish designs. Wyches. Their eyes gleamed with a predatory excitement as they looked us over.
This one,
Purred a witch with cruel beauty, prodding one of the strongest surviving guardsmen. Vance, a farm boy turned soldier.
and this one, and this one.
She added, crouching to grip my chin, forcing my face up. Her eyes met mine, icy green, utterly without mercy. I glared despite myself. She chuckled and said something to her companions. They laughed. I'm sure I was making a foolish, defiant face, but it amused rather than angered them. In total, they picked 6 of us from that cell, those who still had some meat on our bones and fire in our eyes. Tal was not among us. He had been taken by the homunculi a couple of nights prior, and we hadn't seen him return. My heart sank at the thought that my one friend might be gone. In truth, that might have been kinder than what later became of him. We were shackled again and marched out under guard of these new owners. As I left, I glanced back at those remaining in the cell, only a handful now. They stared at us with pity and envy. The perverse truth is, being taken by the Wyches might mean a quicker end than the homunculi's eternal torment. But no one really knows which is worse. They brought us up, out of the Coven's bowels, back into that toxic night air of the surface city. I winced under the ruddy half-light of stolen suns. It felt like stepping from a tomb into a riot. The witch cult's domain bustled with frenetic energy. In short order, we arrived at a grand open arena, the Colosseum of the Bloodied Kiss, as I later learned its name. A massive structure of black stone and gleaming blades. We were funneled into holding pens beneath the arena floor, joining dozens of other wretches from various sources. Here, we were given crude weapons, mostly to ensure we'd put on a decent show by at least attempting to defend ourselves. That first time in the arena is etched in my memory like acid on metal. They pitted us, 10 human slaves, against a single witch gladiatrix. Yes, 10 on 1, and yet I'd never felt so overmatched. The arena itself was a sand-covered circle littered with obstacles. Spiked pillars, chains hanging from above, pits of unknown depth at the edges. Ringing the pit were thousands of Drukhari spectators, a sea of alien faces eager for carnage. Their roar when we stumbled out into the light was deafening. I gripped a rusted sword in sweaty hands. My fellow prisoners fanned around uncertainly, blinking in the sudden glare. Across from us, the lone opponent awaited the signal to begin. She was tall, willowy, clad in sleek armor that left her midriff bare, revealing a taut, scarred stomach. In her hands were dual blades that gleamed with toxin. Her face was uncovered, regal, beautiful, absolutely predatory. It was the same witch who had chosen me earlier. A gong sounded. With a burst of impossible speed, she was on us. What followed was not a fight, but a cat playing with trapped mice. She toyed with us. Our group's cohesion shattered immediately as panic took hold. One prisoner hurled his spear and ran toward the perimeter, only to trip on a snaking chain placed as a hazard. The witch darted past him with a fluid slash. His head toppled from his shoulders before he hit the ground. Blood sprayed across the sand to the crowd's delight. 2 of us tried to coordinate, wielding swords side by side to flank her. She cartwheeled between us, slicing one man's hamstrings as she went. He collapsed, screaming. The other swung wildly. She parried, laughed, then thrust a dagger up under his ribcage in a grotesque parody of an embrace. He choked and slid off her blade. Heart pounding, I backed toward a pillar, trying to keep her in view. Around me, my comrades were being slaughtered, one by one, in sprays of red and wails of agony. Vance, the farm boy, managed to actually land a hit, his club cracking against her shoulder. The crowd booed or gasped at the audacity. The witch didn't so much as grunt. In retaliation, she spun low and scissored her legs, sweeping Vance off his feet. In a blink, her blade pinned his throat to the sand. She winked at him almost flirtatiously, then slit his throat with a flourish. The roar of the onlookers swelled, part approval, part ravenous hunger for the final kills. I realized with dread that I was the last one standing. 7 of us lay dead or dying in pieces around the arena. One other was alive but crawling away, entrails dragging. His end came with a swift stab from the witch to silence his mewling. Now it was just me and her. My mouth was bone dry. Blood dripped from her blades, pattering on the sand. She stalked toward me, rolling her neck as if loosening up. I saw no fatigue in her, not even a heavy breath. I feinted left, then lunged right with my sword, a clumsy but desperate maneuver. She swayed aside effortlessly. Her blade flickered out and I felt a line of pain score across my thigh. I stumbled, nearly falling. The wound burned, poison. She did not press the advantage. Instead, she circled me as I hobbled near the spiked pillar, enjoying the prolonging of my fear. The crowd's chant built into a rhythmic pulse. I could not understand their dark Eldar tongue, but I knew they were effectively telling her to finish it. A voice crackled in my mind. No one dies quickly in the dark city. That's what Tal had said, an old slave told him. And Emperor, help me. I didn't want to die slowly under her blade. With a ragged cry, I mustered everything and charged straight at her in a final gambit, swinging overhead with enough force to cleave her in two if it landed. It didn't. She sidestepped and kicked my kneecap sideways with a sickening pop. I collapsed onto that knee, screaming as agony lanced up my leg. My sword clattered away. Cold steel kissed the back of my neck, a sword poised for the death blow. I knelt there, disarmed, defeated, waiting for the strike that would end me. Part of me was ready for it. Do it, I thought. Get it over with. But death, true to form, did not come quickly. Instead, I heard a translator-augmented voice boom across the arena, an announcer addressing the crowd. The witch's blade remained resting on my neck, but she did not cut. I was breathing hard, tears of pain and frustration mixing with sweat. The crowd gave a mix of cheers and jeers. Some wanted me dead now. Others apparently enjoyed the show of a monkey lasting this long and clamored for more. After a tense moment, the witch withdrew her blade. She grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked my head back. I met her eyes, mine full of hate, hers alight with cruel glee.
Not today, little warrior.
She cooed in heavily accented low Gothic, just loud enough for me to hear amidst the din. Then crack. Darkness as her pommel struck my temple. I don't recall being dragged out of the arena. My consciousness flickered in and out. Next I knew I was lying on a cold stone floor in some underchamber, alive, shaking from adrenaline and shock. Around me, medics, slave medics likely, were tending to wounds. A burly Drukhari with a data slate walked among the survivors, for there were a couple besides me from other bouts, taking stock. They had spared me. Not out of kindness, of course, but because I had entertainment value. The crowd had been promised an underdog story now. The human who lived through a witch's gauntlet to fight another day. I was property of the witch cult of the flayed hand, slated for more matches. So began my stint as a gladiator slave. In a twisted sense, those days in the arena were the closest thing to purpose I felt in Commorragh. It was still terror and pain, but at least I could fight back, however hopelessly. And sometimes, against all odds, I survived. Each victory was Pyrrhic. I lost comrades, shed blood, compromised bits of my soul, but it was a victory nonetheless. and for a brief moment as the crowd screamed, I felt not triumph, but something like defiance. The ember in me glowed a little brighter each time I denied them my death. They gave us just enough treatment to keep us alive and combat-worthy. Infirmary slaves smeared coagulants on my thigh, mended my dislocated knee with a primitive brace. A day, or whatever passed for a day in that eternal twilight. Later, I was tossed into a crude training pen with a handful of other newly christened gladiators. We were forced to spar, to learn how to at least make a good show of dying. An old arena slave, a human collaborator who had long since sold his soul for survival, drilled us in basic weapons handling and tactics. It was absurd, the idea that a few half-starved humans could be trained to pose any threat to Drukhari fighters or the beasts of Commorragh. But we had to try. Pride or dignity didn't factor in. It was train or be sent out to certain death. I met 2 other survivors there who became my temporary comrades. One was Reiko, a hive-ganger girl from some other world, tough as nails, covered in crude tattoos. She had survived her first match by feigning death among the corpses until retrieval, a risky gambit, but it paid off. Another was an Eldar outcast, ironically, a Drukhari who had displeased someone and been thrown into the arena to atone in blood. He was lithe and skilled, but half malnourished like us. He spoke to us only rarely, but fought with a desperate zeal when pitted against beasts. We formed a strange little unit, supporting each other as best we could. In whispers at night, Reiko and I would share a joke or a memory. She told me about her older brother and the gang wars back home. I told her about sunrise over the wheat fields of Gudrun. Simple, human things. The Eldar exile would listen quietly from a distance, perhaps remembering a time long ago when he wasn't surrounded by enemies. In those moments, huddled in the dark, we almost felt normal. The feeling never lasted. We were thrown into combat again and again for the amusement of the masses. Our second match was against a captive lictor, the tyrannid hunter beast with scything claws and chameleonic skin. They wanted spectacle, and they got it. A dozen of us slaves, our little group among them, against the alien horror. The lictor picked off the weak ones within moments, impaling a man through the chest and bisecting another with a sweep of its blade limbs. But we'd anticipated that. While it busied with the first kills, the rest of us encircled it. I still remember the primal fear as it materialized out of its camouflage right in front of me, towering insectoid death, only for Reiko to leap onto its back, plunging a makeshift spike into what she hoped was a vulnerable joint. It shrieked an ululating cry. The Drukhari crowd gasped with excitement. By sheer luck and group effort, we prevailed, though only 3 of us remained standing at the end, myself, Reiko, and the silent Drukhari exile. We had managed to slay the lictor, plunging spears into its brain after a wild, bloody struggle across the arena. The crowd's excitement was palpable. Clearly, they hadn't expected us to win. But the spectacle was not over. As we leaned on our weapons amidst the lictor's twitching corpse, the arena announcer declared only one victor could be allowed. A wicked curved dagger was tossed into the sand between myself and the wounded Drukhari exile. They wanted us to duel to the death. I looked at him, appalled. We had just bled together to survive, and now they demanded fratricide for sport. He knelt, clutching a gash in his side, a weary acceptance in his eyes. The crowd began to jeer at my hesitation. The Drukhari gladiator managed a pained smirk and rasped in broken Gothic, "Do it, quick!" He understood as well as we did. Refusal meant a far worse fate for us both. My fingers wrapped around the dagger's hilt. Hot tears cut through the grime on my face as I mouthed a prayer of forgiveness. Then I thrust the blade into his heart. He shuddered and fell limp with a final exhale, perhaps grateful it was over. The stadium erupted in savage approval. I stood over his body, shaking, bile rising in my throat. The Drukhari had made me into their executioner, and I hated them all the more for it. When the match was done, they allowed the surviving two of us to be patched up and even granted a night of rest, likely in preparation for another battle. I slept fitfully, dreams haunted by the face of the Eldar I had killed and the shriek of that lictor. Our third outing saw us face a pack of warp beasts, skinless hounds that flickered in and out of reality. By then, Reiko and I fought like a seasoned team, covering each other. We lost a few others in that fight, but in the end we stood victorious over a pile of eviscerated flesh hounds, panting and bleeding but alive. I had taken a nasty bite to my shoulder, and Reiko's arm was broken. But we lived. 2 victories in a row. Such an unlikely streak drew even more attention. Wagers were being placed on us now. I could see it in the eyes of the arena masters, the greed, the calculation. We were no longer mere fodder. We were entertainers with some value. And value in Commorragh can extend one's life for a time. Between fights, the witch cult actually provided better food and healing. After all, a gladiator who dies of infection off the arena floor makes for poor drama. My wounds were tended by a surly coven adept. He even reset Reiko's broken arm and installed a crude brace with injectors that fed her pain-dulling drugs so she could still fight. They wanted us in top shape for whatever came next. In those respites, I found my hatred focusing. Before, I hated in a general, flailing way the pain, the fear, the city, its people. Now I began to hate specific faces, specific names. The witch who had initially spared me, her name was Seelith. I heard it chanted often. She was somewhat of a rising star in the cult. I hated her with the white-hot intensity of a sun. Archon Krylak, who I'd glimpsed attending one of our matches from a grand balcony. I hated his smug enjoyment, the way he whispered to his retinue as we bled for him. Hatred, paradoxically, gave me focus and kept me from falling into despair. Perhaps it even fueled my performance, for eventually Archon Krylak himself took notice of me. After our 4th arena victory, yes, 4th, we somehow also survived a battle against captured Orc commandos, which was more luck than skill since the Orcs decided to attack the Drukhari referees instead of us, causing chaos. Our summons came. Reiko, myself, and 2 surviving others were removed from the general slave pens and taken to a side chamber. There, a retinue of Kabbalite soldiers awaited with shackles and a grav transport. We were being purchased or claimed by the Archon of the Cabal allied to this witch cult. I didn't know whether to be terrified or relieved. The Archon was the one ultimately in command of this region of Commorragh. To be in his custody meant leaving the daily arena meat grinder. But Archons are known to be no less cruel, only more political in their cruelties. They took us to Krylak's spire, High Commorragh, a realm of the elite. Krylak's citadel was a star scraper in the inner city, a world away from the gutters of the arena pits. We lowly slaves rode a caged skiff up along the spire's flank. I saw the vast city stretching out below, an endless landscape of spires upon spires, bridges latticing between them in impossible networks. The sky was an infinite dusk, and across it streaked the trails of hundreds of ships entering and leaving through distant webway gates like cosmic scarab holes. For a moment, despite everything, awe overtook me at the sheer scale and otherworldly beauty of Commorragh. An evil beauty, but undeniable in its grandeur. Then our skiff docked, and we were ushered into the Archon's palace. Polished black marble floors reflected our haggard forms with a warped distortion. It was like walking on the surface of dark water that showed funhouse ghosts of ourselves. I heard whispers, faint and distant. Later I realized the very floors had souls bound in them. Each step over the marble made them sigh. The halls were adorned with silken banners depicting scenes of betrayal and slaughter in exquisite thread of gold, each tapestry no doubt centuries old and made from unspeakable materials. Some looked alarmingly like human hair and flayed skin woven into the designs. Alcoves held statues of previous archons or favored courtiers, but these statues moved subtly when not directly observed. One I passed had eyes that followed me, and at one point its lip curled in a sneer. Whether bound wraiths or clever automata, I don't know. Sometimes I could steal a glimpse outside through an arrow-slit window. Far across the urbanscape, I noticed enormous silhouettes that moved as if alive, colossal statues reenacting some eternal assassination or duel. I later learned that was the infamous City of Titans, where gargantuan effigies of past archons literally act out betrayals in slow, ceaseless motion. Below, I could make out a pale expanse known as the Bone Middens, a district blanketed by mountains of skulls and bones, arranged in grotesque tableaus to commemorate the Drukhari's countless victims. Even the firmament itself was unnatural. Captured suns, suspended in distant sub-realms, cast a dim, sickly illumination, never a true dawn or dusk. That panorama was horrifying, yet strangely it gave me perspective, reminding me that my suffering was but a drop in an ocean of atrocity, a single wretch beneath a sky of stolen light. We were brought into a throne room of sorts, to kneel before Archon Krylak. I recognized him from the arena balcony, tall, commanding, dressed in a coat that seemed to writhe. I later realized it was made of fused, still-living faces of his past enemies, their expressions contorting eternally. His features were sharp, elegant, with an upturned, cruel twist to his lips. On his shoulder, pauldron, an engraved sigil in the shape of a broken rune. The Cabal of the Broken Sigil, his domain. He descended a few steps from his throne dais, eyes narrowing as he inspected us. We kept our gazes averted, having learned that directly meeting an Archon's eyes unbidden can earn a lashing or worse. But I stole a quick glance. There was something unsettlingly human in his expression, not in a sense of compassion, Emperor, no, but in the way a human might inspect a prize dog or horse. Evaluating.
This is the one.
He spoke in a low voice to a subordinate. He was referring to me, I realized. Yes, my Archon, simpered a sycophantic Sybarite at his side.
The monk who bested the lictor and the hounds. Quite tenacious.
Krylak stepped closer until his high boots were inches from my kneeling head. He reached out with a surprisingly strong, cold hand and lifted my chin. I found myself looking up into his face. I'll never forget those eyes, pale gray irises rimmed in a toxic green, like the edge of a storm. They bored into mine as if peeling back layers. I had a fleeting thought to spit in his face, to show I wasn't broken. But in truth, I was perilously close to broken and wasn't keen to expedite my demise. What did he see in my eyes? Defiance? Despair? Some mix of both? He chuckled softly.
Yes, this one has spirit left.
He spoke Gothic surprisingly well, albeit with a lilting accent.
I admire that. It will make what comes next so much more interesting.
I had no idea what he meant by that at the time. Krylak addressed us collectively now, stepping back into a comfortable stance with hands clasped behind him.
You have provided fine entertainment. My arenas thrive on tales of the unexpected, and you delivered. Such potential.
He said that last word with a hungry inflection.
In recognition, you are no longer mere fodder. You now serve me directly.
Reiko, beside me, couldn't suppress a tiny sigh of relief. To her, being taken into the Archon's service probably meant a break from constant fighting. But I felt a pang of dread. There was an ominous subtext to Krylak's smile. He was claiming us, yes, but not to free us, to use us in some new game. We were promptly fitted with new collars, far more sophisticated than the simple iron rings of the arena. These were tight, embedded with blinking lights and needles on the inside that pricked our necks. I winced as mine locked shut. "Insurance," a slaver sniggered. "Misbehave and we flood your veins with neurotoxins or explosives." Charming. From that point, my life took a strange turn. I became something of a pet gladiator for the Archon's court. He would show me off during lavish feasts and gatherings. Me, a battered human, paraded like a rare caged animal that had performed amusing tricks. I was ordered to recount my combats for assembled guests, like I was a bard telling war stories. Sometimes they'd have me and the other surviving gladiators spar, with blunted weapons and collars primed in case we got too into it, for their amusement during dessert. It was humiliating beyond measure, yet I did it because the alternative was likely a visit to the homunculus, or worse. The Archon's household was a new kind of horror, gilded and refined, but horror nonetheless. I was given a loincloth and a harness as a livery and often made to stand at attention near Krylak's seat, like a breathing statue. If his chief mistress, Lady Aurelia, a venomous beauty, took issue with my posture or face, she'd idly carve a line along my arm with her razor fans to make me flinch, eliciting laughter from the table. They spoke freely in front of me, assuming, mostly correctly, that I couldn't understand their Eldar tongue unless they switched to Gothic for jests or threats. Thus, I became a near-invisible witness to their intrigues. I saw how Krylak navigated the constant treachery of Commorragh's high society, how a cupbearer's hand trembled slightly one night as he poured wine, and Krylak casually mentioned how clumsy humans are, prompting the terrified slave to drink from the Archon's cup first. The poor man did and convulsed, frothing at the mouth, dead from the poison meant for Krylak. The Archon just sighed, more annoyed by the waste of good wine than by the assassination attempt. On another occasion, during a grand feast celebrating some victory, I witnessed the Archon's inner circle make sport of lower retainers. They forced two of Krylak's least valuable courtiers to duel to the death for a minor insult, cheering and placing bets as the hapless fools hacked at each other. The winner, barely alive, was then killed by Lady Aurelia anyway. He was boring, she said with a yawn. Life meant nothing to these monsters unless it entertained or served them. I served at that feast, circulating with a platter of narcotic-laced fruits. I remember at one point stopping near a window. Far off in the distance through that pane of crystal, I saw a ripple of color in the dark sky, one of Commorragh's stolen suns ejecting a feeble solar flare. It bathed the spires in a brief, poisonous violet glow. The nobles hissed at the discomfort of the bright light. "Ugh, tell the homunculi to better leash that star, one of them complained in irritation, shielding her eyes. Krylak chuckled, replying, "Fret not, its claws were cut long ago. See, it fades." Indeed, the light subsided swiftly, and twilight's gloom reasserted itself. The incident lasted mere heartbeats, but it struck me deeply. Even the sunlight here was enslaved, leashed, bled off to power their city, and derided when it showed any vigor. In Commorragh, not even a star could shine freely. After that glare, the gathering's mood turned even more hedonistic to compensate. At the Archon's gesture, entertainment was brought in, this time slaves forced to perform lurid dances under agony-inflicting stimuli. It was an obscene display meant to amuse the jaded senses of the Drukhari elite by mixing pain with art. Some died in the process, their bodies literally dancing themselves to death under the homunculi-crafted torment devices. The audience clapped politely at the finale, as if it were a well-executed opera. I also saw something that gave me deeper insight into the fate of those taken by the homunculi. One evening in Krylak's court, a particular master artisan, homunculus, named Zelor, visited, likely the same fiend who had overseen our torture before. As a gift, he revealed a new creation, living art for the Archon's palace. We were all brought to the grand foyer to witness the unveiling. Curtains were drawn back to reveal a grotesque sculpture. My stomach churns even now at the memory. It was a writhing pillar of flesh formed from dozens of slaves fused together, alive and aware. Their bodies had been merged and reshaped into a single helical column. Their faces protruded at intervals, contorted in endless silent screams, vocal cords removed, perhaps, for the piece was eerily quiet. The homunculus proudly described how each twist of the sculpture's form was carefully arranged for aesthetic harmony. Krylak and his guests marveled, stepping around it as one might appraise a fine marble statue, murmuring appreciation for the detail and emotion captured in it. I recognized one of the faces in that mass. Emperor, forgive me. I recognized it. It was one of the soldiers from my regiment, a man I used to trade dirty jokes with during barracks downtime. Now his eyes bulged from the sculpted mass, blinking rapidly, tears of pain flowing freely. He was one tiny part of this artwork, fated to remain like that, conscious and suffering, perhaps forever. I vomited on the spot. I couldn't help it. A wave of dizziness and nausea overwhelmed me, and I heaved onto the pristine floor. For that I was punished, whipped bloody by Krylak's slave master in front of everyone for spoiling the moment. But truth be told, I hardly felt the lashes, so numb was I from the horror of what I'd seen. No punishment they gave could equal the punishment of having to live with these images in my head. That night I curled on the floor of a servant's alcove, trembling, feverish from infection in my whip wounds. Another human slave, a scullion girl, quietly crept over and dabbed my wounds with a wet cloth. She didn't speak. She'd had her tongue cut out, I think. But her kindness in that moment stands out like a beacon in the dark, an act of genuine compassion in Commorragh. It almost made me cry anew. I wish I could say I clung to thoughts of the Emperor to get me through, but my faith had been deeply shaken. I tried to believe this was a test of faith that I might survive. But as the atrocities mounted, I felt my belief in a just universe, in a benevolent God-Emperor watching over us, erode. What God would allow this? Perhaps that's what She Who Thirsts is, the absence of his light. Commorragh is a city forsaken by any gods save evil, and living here I feared that corruption was seeping into me too. My mental state deteriorated. Nightmares, not that there is night or day, but in the rare sleep cycles allowed, plagued me, vivid and relentless. I would wake up not with a scream. I learned to stifle those, else risk a shock from my collar. But with my heart hammering, sweat drenched, sometimes tears I didn't remember crying wet on my cheeks. More than once I woke to find Lady Aurelia in the doorway, watching me with a curious little smile, as if my night terrors were a form of entertainment she checked in on. Reiko fared no better. She had been kept in the gladiator pens for future use, but Krylak had her brought to the spire as well, wanting to have all his new toys close. We rarely had a moment to speak freely, but when we did, cleaning the kennels or scrubbing blood from the banquet hall floors, she confided how close she was to snapping. One more grotesque sight, she said, and she'd lose her mind. I understood. I was dangling by a thread myself. Then came the fateful event, the catalyst for my final attempt at escape, though escape is a relative term, as you'll see. Archon Krylok's rival, Lady Aurelia Malinax, made a move against him. Commorragh's politics are deadly and fluid. Alliances can turn to war overnight. I'd heard whispers, while serving unseen in corners, that Aurelia was displeased with Krylok's growing prestige, bolstered in part by the spectacles we gladiators provided. Perhaps she sneered that he was elevating lowly slaves as symbols of his glory, an insult in their culture of nobility. Whatever the reason, her forces launched a surprise attack on Krylok's spire. It happened swiftly. One moment I was polishing a suit of decorative armor in a side hall, the next alarms were blaring. A haunting wail that made my blood run cold because I'd only ever heard it during the arena entrance, never in the spire. The lights dimmed to deep crimson. Guards shouted in Drukhari, taking up positions. Explosions rocked the building. In the confusion, I ducked into the alcove that had become my sleeping nook and pressed myself flat, trying to stay out of the immediate fray. Through the latticework of an ornate vent cover, I watched armed Drukhari in unfamiliar livery, Aurelia's forces, skirmish with Krylok's household guard in the corridor beyond. Green splinter rounds hissed through the air, shattering the armor I'd just been polishing. One of Krylok's sybarites fell, his face a pincushion of crystalline shards. This was my chance. In the chaos of Commorragh's internal war, I might slip away. To where I hadn't a clue, but anywhere not under direct watch seemed preferable. I had two options: hide and hope the victors simply never find me, unlikely, or actively find a way out of the spire and maybe into some webway portal or onto a docked ship. The latter was a fool's hope, but it was hope. Heart in my throat, I crept out once the immediate firefight moved down the hall. My collar was still on, no way to remove it. If the Archon's command signal left its radius, likely he had a remote, it might detonate or poison me. But maybe in the confusion that detail would be missed. Or maybe I was a walking bomb now, regardless. I decided not to think too hard on it. I was dead if I stayed anyway. Once Aurelia's troops swept through, killing loyalists, and slaves were not likely to be spared aside from those they'd take as spoils. Step by step, I navigated downward through service corridors. The spire shook with blasts. In the distance, I heard the unmistakable snarling whine of Hellions. Aurelia must have employed some Hellion gangs because the sound of skyboards and manic cackling came from an open terrace I skirted. Smoke began to fill the lower halls. I passed bodies, Drukhari and slave alike, strewn about. A trio of human servants had been nailed to a wall, likely for sport by raiders. I slipped past, biting down bile. Keep moving. Keep moving. At last, deep in the belly of the spire, I reached the old portal chamber. I'd been here once before when delivering a message to the Archon's homunculus allies. It was essentially an emergency webway gate, dormant but maintained for quick getaways. I didn't know if it was active or where it led, but it was my best bet. Inside, the chamber was dark, lit only by the flicker of unstable energy around the archway. Yes, the portal was active, a swirling haze shimmering within the ancient rune-carved frame. Someone had used it recently. Maybe Krylok himself had fled through it, or some of Aurelia's troops had come in by this route. I approached the humming gateway, body shaking with adrenaline. This was it, a portal out of Commorragh, or into an even worse fate in the blind dimensions of the webway. Behind me, I suddenly heard a guttural growl. From a corner, stepping partly out of the shadow, a mandrake. Perhaps the same that had taken Farron, or another. Pitch-black skin patterned with wisps of darkness. eyes glowing faintly like hot coals. It had likely slithered in through the mayhem drawn by blood. It regarded me with an evil tilt of its head, clawed fingers flexed. I realized the choice: step into the unknown portal or face a living nightmare of Commorragh's under realms here and now. I leapt. Cold, cloying nothingness enveloped me as I hurled myself through the webway gate. A dislocation of senses. Up was down, light was sound. My body stretched into infinity, then compressed to a point. I felt icy tendrils claw at my soul, as if the webway itself objected to my presence. Maybe it did. Humans can't normally traverse it safely without the guidance of the Eldar. But I was beyond thinking of that. With a lurch, reality snapped back. I was ejected onto hard ground, rolling through dirt and dust. Gravity felt different, heavier, normal, real. I gasped, sucking in air that wasn't tainted with the coppery tang of Commorragh. It was thin, cool, night air, actual night under an open sky. I struggled to my feet, every muscle protesting. I was in some kind of forest clearing, starlight filtering down. The portal behind me was shimmering against a rock outcrop. I had emerged somewhere in the real universe. For a heartbeat, I stood there under unfamiliar stars, free. Giddy, I almost laughed, an utterly inappropriate reaction. But after so long under artificial skies, to see true stars was overwhelming. The cold air on my face was like a kiss of mercy. Then the portal flared again. With an inhuman screech, the mandrake leapt through after me. It landed a few paces away, crouched like a predatory insect. I could see it more clearly now. Its flesh was matte black, absorbing the starlight, limbs elongated and tipped with razor talons. It sniffed the air and fixed those ember eyes on me. Though we were no longer in the dark city, it had marked me as its prey. I backed up until a tree trunk halted me. There was nowhere to run. The portal at my side crackled erratically, likely destabilizing. The mandrake hissed, then pounced. It was on me in an instant, slashing with claws that glimmered with frost. I threw myself aside, catching a glancing rake across my side rather than a disemboweling strike. Searing cold pain blossomed where it struck, my flesh beginning to blacken with supernatural frostbite around the wound. I was weaponless, except for a jagged piece of metal I'd grabbed in the spire, part of a shattered spear tip. Hardly ideal, but instinct made me jam it forward as the creature closed again. Miraculously, the crude blade sank into the mandrake's abdomen. It screeched, an eerie, chittering sound. Before it could recover, brilliant beams of white light lanced through the air, illuminating the clearing like day. Harsh voices barked in a language I knew, low Gothic, tinged with a harsh accent. "Target there! Fire!" Last bolts streaked and tore into the mandrake. The creature convulsed under the volley of disciplined gunfire, ichor spraying. It turned towards these new threats, silhouettes of armored soldiers advancing from the tree line. But the Imperials, for so they were, did not let up. Within seconds, the mandrake was a smoldering heap on the ground, dissolving into ichorous vapor with a final unearthly howl. I stood dumbly, swaying on my feet, blood oozing from my many wounds, blinking into blinding searchlights. Several troops surrounded me, last guns trained warily. They looked like Imperial Guard. I saw flak armor, the Imperial Aquila on their gear. My heart wanted to burst. I croaked something, maybe help or Emperor be praised. Not sure it was coherent. Then my knees buckled. Strong arms caught me under the shoulders before I hit earth. "Steady, we got you," a voice said. A human voice. I broke into hysterical sobs, my body and mind finally giving up the fight as I realized I was, for the moment, safe. The last thing I remember before blacking out was a Medicae shining a light in my eyes and him muttering, "Thrown alive, what did they do to you?" I awoke in an Imperial field hospital orbiting that world, which I later learned was an outpost planet named Valath Prime. They had sedated me heavily. I suppose I was thrashing in my sleep, screaming. I opened my eyes to find myself in a real cot, clean sheets, soft pillow. It was so alien a feeling after the hard floors of Commorragh that I almost panicked, not recognizing where I was. A nurse noticed I was awake and hurried to fetch the attending chirurgeon and a man in a greatcoat I would come to know as Inquisitor Lusma. They asked me gentle questions at first. My name, rank, serial number, homeworld, standard debrief for a recovered POW. But when it came to duration of captivity and nature of captors, I broke down. It was too much. They had to sedate me again when I started screaming and tore out an IV line in delirium. Over the next weeks, with careful coaxes, I recounted much of what I've told here to an inquisitorial savant who recorded my testimony. Sometimes I wonder if they believed it, truly. The horrors of Commorragh stretched the sanity of even the most battle-hardened Imperial officials, but the physical evidence on me was hard to refute. I was a ruin. Even after excellent Imperial medical care, I'm covered head to toe in scars. The augmentations the Homunculi did, those remained in odd ways. My pain tolerance is abnormally high, though that's nothing I ever wanted. It's the result of nerve damage and conditioning. My left knee now contains some kind of synthetic graft that confounded the medics, an unholy mix of wraith bone and vat-grown cartilage. They considered removing it, but it actually functions better than my original knee, so they left it. The implant at the base of my skull, however, was a major issue. Remember the insurance collar? Part of it had fused into my spine, some arcane sliver of pseudotech. The Medicae tried to remove it, and I went into immediate cardiac arrest as it stimulated my vagus nerve violently. So they stopped. As far as we know, it's inert now. But it means a piece of Commorragh will be literally with me forever, grafted to my spine. The psychological wounds, well, you can imagine. The night terrors, the aversion to any kind of darkness, for in every shadow I fear a mandrake lurks. The sound of triumphant laughter, a joyous sound to most, makes me vomit with anxiety, because it brings back the crowds and their delight at our suffering. I cannot be touched unexpectedly without lashing out. I ripped an orderly's ear off when he tried to adjust a blanket on me from behind. I was mortified afterwards, but in the moment my body reacted as if a rack had come for me. They say I have something called severe trauma and acute stress disorder. Fancy labels for broken soul. The Inquisitor was surprisingly kind. He didn't immediately ship me to some interrogation cell or execution for seeing Xenos secrets. Perhaps because I had valuable intel on Commorragh, albeit from a lowly perspective, or perhaps out of genuine pity. He even gave me a data slate at one point and suggested I transcribe my experiences as therapy. That's partly why I'm writing this now, or speaking it rather, to the autoquill. But I know the Inquisition. At some point, once I've outlived my usefulness, they will deem me tainted. And in many ways, they'd be right. I don't feel like I belong in the Imperium anymore, truth be told. I close my eyes and I'm back in that cage, or that cell, or the arena, or that throne room of horrors. I smell blood that isn't there, hear screams long silenced. In a crowd when I should feel relief at being among fellow humans again, I instead feel crushing loneliness. No one around me has any idea, any possible concept of what I endured. I'm a Vox recording of hell playing in a garden party, utterly out of place. My body is free, yes. They tell me I can likely return to some semblance of life if I recover. Perhaps a desk job in the Munitorum, or a quiet assignment on some distant agri colony where I can breathe fresh air and watch real sunsets. Emperor knows I crave that, but I also know I'll never truly have it. The war inside my head won't end just because I'm out of the Dark City. A part of me never left Commorragh. It clings to me like a shadow, long and dark, cast by those eternal twilight suns of theirs. I escaped physically by some miracle of the Emperor's grace, or sheer blind luck. But no one escapes the Dark City. Not wholly, not intact, not truly. I will carry Commorragh brand until I die. Every scar, every nightmare, every twitch of fear is a whisper of that place saying it owns me still. And so as I finish recounting this, you must understand the finality of it all. My story doesn't end with heroic triumph or full recovery. It simply continues, day by day, battle by battle, as I try to piece together a shattered mind and ailing soul. Perhaps I will find a measure of peace eventually, or perhaps not. Perhaps the Emperor will have pity and cloak my dreams in forgetfulness, or perhaps I'll eat my last pistol one black morning when it becomes too much. I don't know. What I do know with iron certainty is this. No one escapes the Dark City. No one, not even me.